What's the craziest thing a doctor ever told you to do? What if they prescribed arsenic or something called dead mouse paste? And yes, that's what it sounds like. What if they said the cure for stuttering was to cut half your tongue off? Well, I wouldn't like that. Those all sound crazy, right? But those were all actual things that doctors have told their patients to do at some point in history. We're lucky that in our modern age, doctors are mostly well-trained and responsible, but that wasn't always the case. Doctors used to give terrible advice that caused embarrassment, injury, and even death. Have you ever heard the term snake oil salesman? It's a term people use to describe scammers who sell products that don't work. Guess where that name comes from? You guessed it, there really were people who did sell snake oil. Most of them were con men who claimed the oil had miraculous healing properties. And some of those con men were doctors. That's not an encouraging story, is it? But it's not just about doctors prescribing things that don't really help. There was a time when the recommendations actually hurt you. For example, cigarettes. Remember them? They were the cause of uncountable cases of cancer and emphysema. Guess who recommended those to cure asthma from the 1930s to the 1950s? And even after that, doctors appeared in commercials making outrageous claims about cigarettes. Things like menthol cigarettes, soothing your T-zone, whatever that is. We all know cigarettes are bad for you. And it turns out that cigarette companies and doctors also knew it for a long time. But it gets even worse than tobacco. How about heroin and cocaine? Those are serious drugs with serious side effects that can get you serious jail time. But there was a time when doctors handed out prescriptions for them. They basically treated cocaine like it was a cure for everything. They prescribed it for toothaches, depression, sinus issues, impotence, glaucoma, even alcoholism. If you think that's bad, heroin was even worse. Around the beginning of the 1900s, they started prescribing it to children. If your kid had a sore throat, a cough, or a cold, they prescribed aspirin with heroin in it. And it's not always just prescriptions either. Sometimes it's the procedures. Most people have heard of electroshock therapy before. It became well known publicly because of the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Doctors used it to treat difficult or troubled psychiatric patients. It is still used in some cases today, but it's much safer than it used to be. That procedure sends electricity into your brain to cause a small seizure. But that's not even the worst procedure they used to do to psychiatric patients. In the 1970s, the United States finally banned frontal lobotomies. I apologize if this description is rough. A lobotomy is when they take a sharp metal spike and they push it into the part of your brain behind your eye. They then hit the spike with a hammer. I promise it's every bit as horrible as it sounds. And they used to think that was helpful to patients with mental problems. Thankfully, lobotomies have been banned in most of the world for decades now. Not all medical procedures are as disturbing as that one. Some of them were just confusing and weird. You heard of a blood transfusion, right? That's when your body is low on blood, so someone else donates blood to you. It's a life-saving process. But did you know that doctors used it to try it with milk? Yes, you heard me right. Some doctors believe that milk could be a perfect substitute for blood in an emergency. Sometimes it was hard to get the right blood type for someone. So these doctors decided to give their patients a milk transfusion. The most surprising part of it is that a few times the patient actually survived and got better. Several other times the patients died. So don't believe that old milk commercial slogan, milk, it does a body good. Trust me, it's not always true. But when you think about it, I can see why someone might think milk would work. Milk is a healthy product, but this next one makes no sense to me. Have you ever heard of an enema? I won't go into too much detail, but it's basically when they put a tube up in your tailpipe and then they shoot water inside of you to clean you out. It can be helpful and healthy, but not when it's what they call a smoke enema. The name is deceptive because they're not really blowing smoke up your nowhere. No, it's worse than that. In a smoke enema, they pump you full of very warm tobacco-soaked water. Sometimes the water is nearly boiling. I'm not a medical expert, but if tobacco is bad when you breathe it in your lungs, I figure it must be bad when you pump it in any other part of you. And speaking of things in places where they don't belong, have you ever heard of the word xenotransplantation? Probably not. It basically describes taking organs from one species and putting them into another species. If that sounds crazy to you, you're not alone. But there were doctors who believed in it and did it. In 1919, one doctor transplanted a gland from a chimpanzee into an 80-year-old man. He claimed that it rejuvenated him. Another doctor claimed he knew the cure for impotence and infertility. His solution? surgically implant goat testicles into a human being's you-know-what. Spoiler alert, those surgeries didn't work and many of the people died as a result. I saved the weirdest medical suggestion until last because it deserves to be in a class all on its own. I am referring to an unconventional method for treating arthritis. People suffering from rheumatoid arthritis in the late 1800s could go to a hotel in Australia. The hotel offered a therapy called the whale cure for rheumatism. How did it work? You're going to wish you had never asked. Arthritis sufferers stayed at the hotel and waited. As soon as the whale died nearby, the patient would be rolled out to the whale's body. The hotel medical staff would cut a hole in the whale and the patient would climb inside. Then they would just lay down inside the dead whale for about 2 hours. And that's it. They claim that this process relieves soreness and inflammation. But let's be honest, if you spent your money and time to crawl inside a dead whale and lay down, would you admit it if it didn't work? And I know what you're thinking. These are crazy examples that are not the norm. You're thinking a lot of these examples were decades ago or even longer. You probably think doctors would never do something to hurt their patients anymore. That's why I want to tell you about fen-phen. Fen-phen was a drug that helped people lose weight. It was a combination of an appetite suppressant and an amphetamine. It was introduced to the market in 1992, just over 30 years ago. It helped the average patient lose 30 pounds with no struggle. It became so popular that over 6 million people ended up using it. But here's the thing. Almost immediately, people started reporting serious side effects. Many had developed serious heart valve problems. It was pulled from the market by 1997. The company that put it out ended up paying a $3.75 billion settlement in 1999. That was less than 25 years ago. Most of the people who took it were young enough that they could still be alive today. That's why I wanted to share these stories with you. Sure, some of them are crazy stories that would probably never happen again, but sometimes doctors and medical companies do make mistakes. Remember, I'm not saying doctors are bad. As a personal injury lawyer, my job is to help people who have been hurt so they can recover and live their best life. I work with a lot of amazing doctors through my job. In fact, doctors saved my life after I was hit by a car. But it's important for people to remember that doctors don't always know all the answers, and patients deserve to be protected from bad ideas and medications that hurt them. That includes doctors, insurance companies, and the pharmaceutical industry. It's not always as simple as knowing you shouldn't get a smoke enema. When you trust a medical professional and they lead you wrong, you deserve justice. So if you're ever in a situation where you've been hurt by someone in the medical field, you know who to call. Call the hammer and stay away from the milk transfusions. I'll see you next time.